Alright, so that's the piece we'll be working off today. Now, the first thing we're going to get into is volume levels with production, and that is one of the most important tips to start off with. As soon as you start your project, you should always have all of your sounds as low as volume as possible for you to not make it awkward, but low enough so that they're not clashing with any of the other sounds. So if I play my chorus back, which is this section here, alright, if we look at my volume levels of my chords section, which is this one, you can see it's not even peaking over 15 decibels, minus 15 decibels, and same with the bass. It's just touching over minus 12 because I want that bass to be a little bit louder than the chords, but basically you want to have all your sounds sort of sitting in that area. The only one that really pushes a little bit above might be your kick, but again, this one's actually sitting just on 12. The reason is for this, as you start adding sounds, you're going to want to lower some and push more. And sometimes it gets to a point where you have to push volume to be louder than everything else, and it goes above 0 dB, and then the sound starts losing its quality. So if you start down low at minus 15 decibels for your first sound, so bring the volume down so that it sits here when you start. Same with all your other sounds. When you start pushing volumes, you've got all the space to work with. But preferably you want to keep everything below negative 9 decibels or minus 12 decibels as much as possible. And the reason is for this, that you don't get ducking happening. And ducking is when sounds will jump volume below and above each other, fighting to be the loudest sound basically, and then you get an unclean and awkward mix come through on your track, and it destroys the cleanliness, and you don't want that. So first things most important, always sort your volume levels nice and low, and all of it will fit together pretty well. Moving on to the next thing, one of my favorite things to do is mess with sounds in the sampler. So a good example is to go to our kicks, which is this simple 4x4 kicks beat in here, which sounds like. Now what you can do with kicks is, let's just set this up as an example so that it will make sense as we come through. This is just an example for what we can do in the sampler. The things you do want to mix with is the ins and outs. Now this is just a basically in and out, more or less fade knob that adjusts how short your out and in for the sample comes in. So for example, if I boost my ins, I get sort of like an up sweep because it's cutting the in, and the same with the out. This is what the kick sounds when it's full. Now you'll need bass headphones to hear the difference here, but we can then cut it and make it shorter. And more again, if we want to. For me, I want it to be a reasonably full kick, but not so much that it's taking all the low space and just sitting in there. Again, you can normalize sounds. So for example, if I make an in here and it's quite quiet, normalizing will bring the volume back up. And then every time you adjust it, it'll automatically normalize itself to that as well. Alright, so we'll bring that back to the way it was. The next thing is to use the envelope. Now the envelope is the second tab inside the sampler here, and I'll show you how cool this little area is. If I want my kick to react off the shortness of my notes inside the roll, so you can see here we've got a half beat. This is basically a quarter. Then we'll go down to in here. Right. So you can see the size of these notes are lowering as we go across. We'll actually make that one there. Now, if I play the kick back without the envelope on, it's going to play the entire kick sample as a whole. But if I start messing with this envelope, turn it on, first start, we'll take the attack away, we'll take the sustain and release away, and we'll bring the decay back slightly, and then the hold all the way to none. This is just as an example. This is basically how much of the note it's going to play. So this is what you have here. If I take that decay back more, it's going to have more effect on those notes. So basically what's happening is that the note is then controlled by the length that we have in here. So if I start shortening these values even more, what's happening is it's only playing half or parts of the note because it's controlled by that envelope. So if you wanted to have some sort of glitchy kick, or basically like a quick tip or a shortened version of your sample, you can mess with that in your envelope, and you can do other things with it as well. So you can have like an attack on it, so the kick takes away the punches at the start, or you can even add delay, which you'll only hear off the first one, but this is quite a fun thing to play with. And for kicks, it's pretty basic. I usually don't often use it on the kick, but it's an easy way to explain it. A good one to use it on would be collapse, for example, because if this is your collapse sound here, play that back, you can use your envelope to, again, shorten everything up. And then off the tap. So then if we have our claps in here, we will have one here, and then in between we could do little glitches just to add some sort of effects as we go through. So we go like here, and here. And that just means you can start making your own little glitchy effects and loops like that. Often used in, R&B, rap tracks, things like that. But it can be handy for using on any sound. So just start messing with that envelope and the settings inside there. Now, one of the next things I wanted to go over was also in the sampler, and it is the use of the stretch. This is one thing that I learned quite late into FL Studio, but I didn't even know about it until I watched someone else do it on a tutorial. Now, if I play this sample back by playing it in the sampler here, this is just my chords. Now, if I go up an octave, see how it's playing extremely fast, but it is up pitched, and that's all controlled by this time stretching section inside the sampler. If I go to my mode here, resampling means that as you bring the sample up in pitch or down in pitch, it'll resample it to that pitch, which means if you lower the pitch, it'll go slower. If you raise the pitch, it'll go faster. And to mess with that, we go to the option in here. It's set to resample. Easiest one, next one to mess with is stretch. So now if I play the first note, then I go up an octave, this just means that when it comes to the time of using that clip inside the piano roll, if you want it to stay on time with everything else, but you just want to push up the pitch of that sample, it won't get destroyed. And the manual setting, your standard setting when you open it, will always be on resample. So when I play this note, you can see here, it's already stretched hugely, And if we bring it down, it gets way longer. So you've got then again, if we go to our stretch option, now when I boost it up, and that can be a really fun thing to play with, especially with pitch inside the clips using automations and things like that. Now, next we're going to go on to things inside the mixer. So we've done our sampler and we've done our volume levels, which is a couple of the most important things. And next we're going to go on to our EQ. So if we go into our mixer here and I play this bass back, we go into our mixer and we've got it linked to a channel. We go to the next slot and we add in, for me, my favorite EQ is a Fruity Parametric EQ2, and this is what you will see here. Now what you can do from here is you can cut lows and highs, and if I bring the low down here, you can hear the lows, the bass is being taken away. Same with the highs. Now, the reason that this is super important is because what you need to do with an EQ, every time you have a sound, you want to add an EQ and take away any sounds or any part of that sound that you do not need in your mix. For example, in here, the entire spectrum is pretty filled, so there's not a lot that I can do. However, if I go into my chords, which is here, and I open up a parametric EQ2 again, all this low end here, where there is, as you can see, a little bit of volume, because it is lighting up slightly down here, we don't need that. Now what we're doing is getting rid of that sort of sounds. It's not that obvious, it adds a very slight touch, but if you do this with every sound, eventually it's going to have a huge effect on the output volume, which means you can raise the volume on the output more before it will limit or clip. And that means your final mix will be slightly louder. One of the quick tips that I do have for you inside the EQ is if you click on one of the knobs here, you go to Order and you select your standard types. It'll be automatically set to this, so when you bring it down it's got a pretty standard gradient slope like that, but if I right click on it and go to Order, I can add a steeper slope to my sounds, and I quite like using steep 8 to almost create a brick wall for that particular sound. And you can also mess with some of the bands and keys in here if you wanted to. I want a bit more crispy top highs, so I do that and push a little bit up there. Once you have done any of your adjustments, what I recommend to do is to go to your master adjustment here and just adjust your EQs so that you're not pushing above 0 for any of your sounds, and that way you've got a nice clean sound without forcing any more above 0 dB on your EQ. And then you can push the volume back up. Okay, on to our next one. Inside the mixer again, we're going to go over compression. Now if you go to your kicks here, I've got two plugins on here. I've got my EQ. Again, I should have lowered this down. See how I pushed it over? I need to make sure that that stays down as is. And then from there, I can bring my volume back up. Just on 12. Now I would recommend getting this plugin. It's called Camel Crusher, and you can get that for a very, very good price. Now it's a very simple compression and distortion modulator or plugin if you wish. And I use this all the time on my kicks and sometimes on my basses also, and it just adds a little bit more punch to the sound. So if I give you an example, this is just a subtle master, so you've got a tiny bit of distortion press and a little bit of compression on it. So if we take that away, we get, and then if we add, now if you're using headphones, you'll notice a big difference between the two because the bass is very full after we add the Camel Crusher. That is the basic use on the kick. Now if we go to our chords, for example, actually, yeah, let's use our chords. If we go to compressor, use the Fruity compressor in here. There's a couple good presets that you can use. If you go to preset and you just do light, it is a very light compression, and from there you can adjust your own values. So if we play the sound itself, your ratio is basically how much effect that your compression is going to have on the sound. If you push your ratio up too high, it's going to start destroying the sound. So usually if I'm doing a basic compression, I'm going to put it around a max would be 4:1 or 1:4, however you like to say it. But I usually like to keep it, around 1:3, just to keep it nice and light. Or if you're going lighter again, 1:2. And next thing is to adjust your threshold. To give you an example of that. So if we have this maxed, it sounds like. And if we turn it down, but you can hear how much the sound gets destroyed if I max the threshold out. So you don't want to be doing that. Instead, bring the threshold up and just mess with it until you hear it getting destroyed a little more or less, and then bring it back a few notches so that you're not destroying the sound at all. Now, the reason for compression is that what you're doing is you're taking a sound and you're making it sound louder than it actually is. Now, the reason is for this is that when you start adding more and more and more sounds, the louder you can make them sound without them actually being louder means that when you come to your final render or when you're going to mastering, you can push more volume and make your track louder before it limits out. So the reason that people can get songs to be so loud on their final mix is that when they're going through, they're compressing and they're making the sound as loud as possible without destroying the sound before they get to their final master. And that's one of the reasons why they do that. The next thing we're going to move on to is the limiter. And I use the limiter often on a lot of my sounds. So I use an example that we already have in the mixer here. I've already added a limiter to my chords, and I will show you why. If we play the chord sound now, you can see in the volume section of how loud it is, it's way up by 9 here. Now, the reason for that is that this sound has, if you look at the limiter in here, little noises that make it seem louder. Well, you can see in the waveform that there's little spikes on the starts of the chords, and these things are making this track seem louder in the volume when you look at the visual, but it's not actually that loud. So what we do is we grab our ceiling, or our ceiling of the limiter, which is this green adjustment here, and we want to just start chopping the tops off. So when we play it back, we're just cutting the tops off here. So maybe a little bit up. What we're doing is just chopping off these little clips at the top that we don't need. Some sounds may need that, for example, hats or claps, but you want to take off just the top a wee bit and you won't hear the sound being destroyed. But what I'm doing in the end, if you look at the volume here, it's now sitting under 12, whereas it was up by 9 before. So that's 3 decibels, or almost 4 decibels of room that I've added by doing very, very little. That, and pairing with the compressor, will make an extremely good sound that seems louder, but it has a lower output volume in your visual here that you'll see. If you do that with a lot of your sounds, again, your final mix nice and loud. So together. Now that's pretty simple, but an awesome tip indeed. Next thing I'm going to go on to, and the final thing I'm going to go on to today, is sidechaining. And the reason that I use volume sidechain only, and I don't use compression sidechain. If we go to our ambient sound, which is this one, a sidechain is easily created. My personal favorite in FL Studio is to add basically a sidechain to zoom in to where you want, so we can see that this pattern here is our 4 kicks, and we're going to want to sidechain every beat of the bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4 in here, like so. Now, to create a little clip like this, if we highlight in our piano roll, in our playlist here, 1 beat, and I go to my mixer where my sound is linked to, and I go to balance, and I go to my volume here, because balance is just a basic volume modulator. Right click on the volume knob and click create automation clip. I can then make a clip that is only the size of the selection that I have made in here. If I had selected a bar, this clip would have allocated a bar length for that automation. So this way we don't have to then manually adjust clips to create them, to make them fit like so. Then we can turn this into a sidechain by controlling the automation clip. Now, the main reason I do this is because I now can have control over every single sidechain in each beat. That means that if I'm coming to the end of my chorus and I did want to lower the sidechain slowly because I had some other sound coming through here and make it blend better, I can do that. However, if you use a running sidechain inside the mixer, such as kickstart or gross beat, you're not going to be able to do that. So that creates, less freedom. And again, compression sidechains, we talked about it before. Too much compression is going to destroy the sound, and a compression sidechain maxes out compression and then it backs it off as if it's in a slope like this, which means your sound's getting destroyed and then it's being brought back. Sometimes that does sound good with some harder tracks, but majority of the time, 99% of the time, you don't want to be using a compression sidechain. That is my perspective. It depends on what you like, but that's what I would focus on. And sidechain obviously being what it is, if we play the sound back, no sidechain, and then sidechain. One final thing I will say about sidechain, if I have delays and reverbs like I do in here, when I play it back, you can hear the tail end of it. If I put my balance in the channel rack, this is all linear, so balance will be done first, delay will be next, reverb will be next, and then the filter will be last. If I put my balance in at the start, you'll hear the delays and reverbs go over the top, but if I put my balance after them, one too many, then the balance, which is the sidechain, is going to have the full dipping and pumping effect that you hear there. And then also, if you have more sounds, say I wanted to link my chords to the sidechain that I have in here, I just go to my mixer, under my chords section here, I add myself a balance, which will be under fruity balance down the bottom here. I then open that up, go to the volume, right click, and then I go link to controller. Once I'm in this panel, I select the one that I have created, which is here, balance cashmere ambience, and then I go to my input and make sure that it's stayed on default. And then I click accept. I've already added that one in before, so I don't need to do that now, but once you do that, the balance will then control this volume, which is linked to the ambience and also linked to the chords, will have effect over both of them. So when we play it back, and obviously the reason for sidechain is that when a kick is playing, the kick gets full punch and then the sounds flow off that kick. So that means you've got a nice full punch of the kick without having to boost so much volume of the kick that it overtakes the other sounds. And then again, when you come to your final mix, it'll be nice and loud and you haven't destroyed any sounds coming through. So that's it for today. If you don't have the download, it'll be in the description below and you can use that for the tutorial. If you've learned a bunch of things here, please do leave a comment and check anything else down that you wish to. And also give this video a thumbs up and share it with anybody that thinks they need a little bit more tips when it comes to FL Studio. I'll be coming up with some new tutorials in the following month or couple months, so stay tuned. I'm going to be more on the front of these tutorials as we go along, and I've got some great tracks to share and teach with you guys. So thanks, and enjoy.